Are we on? Yes, we're on. We're here. Hello, everybody. Hello, hello. My name is Sheree Fitch, and I'm coming to you from River John, Nova Scotia. The river out there is called Kujibujawak, which means runs through the wilderness. So welcome, everybody. I am so honored to be talking to two incredible authors. Rebecca's not going to be here tonight, and I'm excited. I was talking to a friend the other day, and I said, this is an honor for a couple of reasons. Number one, when I read the books, I'm old now. I have hope. I have hope for the future. It gives me hope. So all of these books did that for one thing. The other reason is Ann Connor Brimer. This is a story, a personal story that you would never know unless I told you. So yeah, I won the award for Mabel Merple a long time ago, and everybody's different on everybody's street, which is tackles mental illness. So I have my silly side, and I also have approached a lot of tougher topics as a writer as well: domestic violence, abortion, all of that kind of stuff, that because we're whole people. So this is something I really care about. But Ann Connor Brimer, when I was at university wondering whether I would keep being a writer, I only had one book out, and I didn't feel like a writer then. I didn't feel like a writer until somebody said, "What are you working on now?" And then I went, "Oh, how did you know I was working on something?" And they said, "Because writers are always working on something." And we were just talking about that before we started tonight. But Ann came to Wolfville, Nova Scotia, when I was doing my master's. I said, "Can I have a cup of tea with you?" Came to my house, sat in my kitchen, said, "You know, Sheree, toes in my nose, we like that, but promise me you'll keep writing." And I'm like, "Well, I'm working on something now, kind of." But I had children. I didn't know how to go forward and be a writer and put food on the table. I didn't know. And then Ann said it again: "Promise me you'll keep writing," and promise me. So finally I said, "Okay, Ann, I promised you I'll keep writing." And about 5 months later, Ann died. And she took time out of her life to come to Wolfville and have tea with me and make me promise to keep writing. Sheree Fitch probably wouldn't be Sheree Fitch if Ann Connor Brimer hadn't looked at me in the eyes and said, "Please, please keep writing. Children's literature is important. Silly is important. Whimsy is important. And hard topics are important." So I wanted you to know that about Ann. She's not just a name. She was a person and a force in our community who gave birth to many, many, many books. So I just wanted to say that about Ann. It is my responsibility to start this evening by acknowledging the land on which we gather for the Atlantic Book Awards Festival. This event is being held online, and we're aware that because of that, a singular land acknowledgement doesn't capture the richness of our distribution across many locations in Atlantic Canada and beyond. Because the majority of the organizers of the Atlantic Book Awards are located in, and I'm sorry about my pronunciation, Shabuktuk, you can help me with that, also known as Halifax, Shabuktuk, I know that. We would like to share the land acknowledgement, and the virtual event was produced in Mi'kma'ki, the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We recognize the peace and friendship treaties signed between the British Crown and the Mi'kmaq from 1760 to 1769. We are treaty people, and we have rights and responsibilities as Mi'kmaq and settlers alike. People watching this video from elsewhere are invited to consider their own position with regard to the land where they find themselves. So the Atlantic Book Awards are going to be presented tomorrow, Thursday, June the 9th at the Paul O'Regan Hall in the Halifax Central Library, starting at 7, and hosted by CTV's Lativia Beezer. The awards will be live streamed for book lovers everywhere. I'm going to plan to be live streaming that tomorrow. And to learn more about the gala and next week festival events, you can go to www.atlanticbooksawards.ca, and you can purchase gala tickets or access the live stream. So before we get started, if any of you have questions for our authors while you're watching, there is a Q&A at the bottom of the screen, and we would ask you to put them and type them in there. Our conversation is going to go about 45 minutes, and then at the end, I will try to get to as many of those questions for the authors as you can. So I want to introduce our two authors here and mention Rebecca as well. I'll start with that, and then we'll get to our discussion and you can hear from them. So Jodie Callaghan is from the list. Now, I practiced this today. Listugjuk. You can correct me.
Listuguj.
Thank you. I had that. I listened to the little microphone pronunciation. I did have it. Okay. And it's the Mi'kmaq First Nation and
Gaspegawagi.
Thank you, Gaspewagi. I thought it would be better coming from you than me. Jodie started writing stories when she was 8 years old, and she's always been drawn to storytelling. She has found writing to be the best way to connect to her history and her culture. She currently resides in my old province, New Brunswick, in northern New Brunswick, with her husband, child, and pets. And when she's not teaching, she's very slowly chipping away at her Master's of Education degree. Know how hard that is, Jodie, from UNB, and dreaming up stories that she's one day going to continue to write. Now, the train, I just want to hold this up. Ashley meets her great uncle by the old train tracks near their community in Nova Scotia. Ashley sees her great uncle's sadness, and uncle tells her of the day years ago when sorry. I'm very sorry. When he and the other children from their community were told to board the train before being taken to residential school where their lives were changed forever. They weren't allowed to speak Mi'kmaq and were punished if they did. There was no one to give them love and hugs and comfort. Uncle also tells Ashley how happy she and her sister make him. They are what give him hope. Ashley promises to wait with her uncle by the train tracks in remembrance of what was lost. It's a beautiful rendering and telling. And the minute I picked it up, I thought of Rita Joe, and who I interviewed a long time ago. So thank you for this beautiful book, Jodie. Chad Lucas has been in love with words since he attempted his first novel on a typewriter in the 6th grade. He has worked as a newspaper reporter, communications advisor, freelance writer, part-time journalism instructor, and parenting columnist. And that just all together makes me really tired, because that is amazing. That is just amazing.
I didn't do them all at the same time.
I know, but it's amazing. A proud descendant of the historic African Nova Scotian community of Lucasville, he lives with his family near Halifax, Nova Scotia. He enjoys coaching basketball and is rarely far from a cup of tea. Thanks a Lot Universe is his debut novel, and it is right here, and it is amazing. Okay, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. It's a moving middle grade debut for anyone who's ever felt like they don't belong. Brian has always been anxious, whether at home or in class, socially awkward, weirdo. That's in the book. I'm not saying that that's there. He'll explain that to you more. I loved it. His dad tries to get him to stand up for himself, and his mom helps as much as she can. But after he and his brother are placed in foster care, Brian starts having panic attacks, and he doesn't know if things will ever be normal again. Ezra's always been popular. He's friends with most of the kids on his basketball team, even Brian, who usually keeps to himself. But now some of his friends have been acting differently, and Brian even seems to be pulling away. Ezra wants to help, but he worries if he's too nice to Brian, his friends will realize he has a crush on him. But when Brian and his brother run away, Ezra has no choice but to take the leap and reach out. Both boys have to decide if they're willing to risk sharing parts of themselves that they'd rather hide. But if they can be brave, as the author has been brave in writing this book, they just might find the best in themselves and each other. Rebecca Thomas is a Mi'kmaq woman registered with the Lennox Island First Nation. She's the daughter of a residential school survivor and an unrelenting advocate for her community. She's a published poet and was the Halifax Poet Laureate from 2016 to 2018. She lives in Shabuktuk, Mi'kmaq. About Swift Fox all along. Okay, so this was shortlisted for the Governor General's Award, by the way. When Swift Fox's father picks her up to go visit her aunties, uncles, and cousins, her belly's already full of butterflies. And when he tells her that today is the day she'll learn how to be Mi'kmaq, the butterflies grow even bigger. Though her father reassures her that the Mi'kmaq is who she is from her eyes to her toes, Swift Fox doesn't understand what that really means. Her family welcomes her with smiles and hugs, but when it's time to smudge and everyone else knows how, Swift Fox feels even more like she doesn't belong. Then she meets her cousin Sully and realizes she's not the only one who's unsure, and she may even be the one to teach him something about what being Mi'kmaq means, based on the author's own experience with striking illustrations by Maya McKibben. And I should say that the illustrations too, Georgia Leslie in the train, wonderful. Um, the Swift Fox All Along is a poignant story about identity and belonging that is at once personal and universally resonant. All these nominations are well deserved, and I want to say congratulations to each of you and thanking you for joining us tonight. So that's the information, and now I want to hear from the authors. So Jodie, I thought I'd start with the train. I found it poetic. I found it musical. I found it, there was a quiet melody behind it. There was a sorrow, but the sorrow was lifted up by the relationship between the great uncle and Ashley. It really is a beautiful, beautiful, moving story of something that is so incredibly sad. So I guess I'm going to begin by asking you the motivation. And also I'm going to ask this to Chad too. You know, Robert Frost a long time ago wrote an essay called The Figure of a Poem. And it was he who said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader. And so I didn't expect to do that tonight, but I would also like you to address, besides what the story behind the story was, what inspired you, is how emotional a journey, because I do think books can be a manifestation of spirit and our emotions. And I just also wanted you to talk a bit about that for those of us who are writers and who want to know about that part of it as well. So the story behind the story and how it was for you on the journey.
Thank you for saying such nice things about my book, first and foremost. So I actually wrote The Train over 10 years ago. And I wrote it, my community has a writing contest every year. It's this really beautiful contest there that they're trying to, pull the storyteller out of people in our community. And I saw the advertisement and I said, I'm going to enter, but I have no idea what to write. At the time, I was working as a video journalist for APTN, and I was actually working in Halifax. And it was around the time of Canada's apology to survivors. And I was there at the site of Shubenacadie, the Shubenacadie Residential School, or where it used to stand. On that day, and I had an opportunity to talk to a lot of survivors, and I was really moved that day, and really, it was a heavy day, and it was something that I think everybody that was in attendance carried for a long time. And when I sat down to write something, the train is what just came out of me. And I kind of paired things I'd heard from survivors that day, and also my grandmother is an Indian day school survivor, so she attended Indian day school in my community, Listovich, and so I had lots of stories from her as well, and everything kind of just came out. And the character of Uncle is reflected. He was really inspired by my grandmother's brothers, who I was very fortunate to grow up with, my great uncles. And so he was kind of like a mishmash of all my great uncles. And yeah, thinking about the emotion that comes with that, obviously it's a very deeply personal story to me, because I really was the character of Ashley. I related my experiences through her. So when she finds out about residential schools, all the emotions and feelings that come from that, that's what I experienced when I learned about it. And I was actually a lot older than the character Ashley. But you feel all those things, the confusion, anger, sadness, it's just something that we weren't really prepared to learn about. But it's something we all learn about. We all have to learn about. So I I think part of me in writing the story was creating something that could start a conversation. That's like a really gentle way to start that conversation. I think with the train, because it's not a survivor's perspective. I'm not a survivor. I can't write from that perspective, but I can write from the perspective of the granddaughter of a survivor. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the motivation, the story behind the story altogether.
Okay. And I'm going to come back and follow up on that in a minute because I have a couple questions about that. But Chad, why don't you go and tell us the story behind the story and what was involved in that? I know that you've been working, that had seeds there for you for a long time.
Yeah, this was one where, I had the idea of the character of Brian for a very long time. And it's one of those ones where I started a book and then kind of got, I don't know, maybe 90 pages in, and it just wasn't clicking, and put it down and worked on something else. And then kind of as I took a couple kicks at it, as we often do as writers. And then as the character of Ezra started to develop more, then the story kind of took shape. And it's one that I tried, more at YA. I tried at different sort of stages. And then now I've really settled on, I think this is a middle grade novel. The character felt like that was the right age for them. And so really it took me a while to figure out how to tell the story. And, it's not autobiographical in any sense, but there's a little bit of me in each of Brian and Ezra, I would say. When I was 12, 13, my family went through a bit of instability that wasn't anything as serious as what Brian faces. But I just remember those feelings of like, life is changing. You're going into junior high, and all of a sudden, like, home life is changing too. Like we moved a lot in that stretch, and just feeling just unsettled, basically. And so, Brian's story kind of comes a little bit from that. And of course, I explored it in very different kind of ways. And then, Ezra, I was a kid who, had crushes on boys and questioned my sexuality, and grew up in a very sort of conservative evangelical home in the 90s. So very, very different kind of, I wasn't as, I guess, able to explore that as freely as Ezra does in the book. But so I found writing Ezra's chapters almost cathartic in some ways. Like, I wish that, 30 years ago, I had been able to think about it in the way that Ezra does in the book. So for me, that writing his story was almost kind of cathartic, I guess, in a bit of a way.
Wow, Chad, thank you. Thank you for being so courageous in what you just shared, and so honest in the book. And that's one thing I'd like to say to whoever's listening here tonight. A long time ago, somebody said, you don't write a book, you create a world. And whether it's a picture book or whether it's a novel, or whether, and in every one of these books, these authors have created worlds that draw us in, and in very different tonally and all of that, but you created worlds and characters that are going to stay with me for a really, really long time. I'm going to circle back to you, Jodie, because so I have a signed autograph book of Out of the Depths by Isabel Knockwood from 1992. And I want to know, and this may be you I, blue-eyed, blonde-haired girl, am angry that it took so long for people to know, when those voices have been out there for a long, long time talking about, I worked up north. My dad told me in the 60s about residential. How is it for you to balance the sense of justice and the beginning of a gentle conversation to have, balanced with knowing that those voices have been there and it took a long time for people to wake up and really hear the truth? I'm interested in that. If you would like to respond to that.
Yeah, I think I definitely think I go through stages in how I feel. Definitely because I was only 19 when I learned about residential schools. I knew that my grandmother went to a school that was run by the church and that there were like mean nuns that worked there, but I didn't really understand that was happening in every community, and that if there wasn't a school there, children were being sent to schools. And it wasn't until I was 19, I think, and we had a Shubenacadie residential school survivor come and talk at an event and share her story. And then there was a lot of anger there, and you know, how could this go on for so long? And I think for me, I guess I'm a teacher as well, and I think being a teacher has helped me a lot with dealing with my emotions around this, because I get to have conversations with my students about it a lot. And I teach, I primarily teach English, but I also teach like media studies, and we talk about these things. And I think talking it out with my students and kind of recognizing the emotions that they have are very similar to the ones that I had early on. It's been really helpful for me in kind of reckoning with those emotions, and then trying to think of, well, what can I do to do something constructive with them, and to, you know, help amplify the voices that need to be amplified right now. And I'd like to hope that the train has done that. And, you know, sharing a story, even though it's a fictional story, it is a similar experience. I'm sure there are survivors that have had that experience. And yeah, I think I definitely go through different emotions. Obviously, there are a lot of raw emotions with the uncovering of all the graves at the various locations across the country. So yeah, it really depends on the day, I guess. And there's still a lot of anger, there's still a lot of hurt. But at the same time, I'm really happy to see those conversations finally being had, especially in the public. Yeah.
Thank you, Jodie. Thank you for that kind of honesty, because that's what I would imagine, that it's never all one, or it's like, yeah, a mix in any given time. And that was something, Chad, to go back to your wonderful book, that is something I found that you did so incredibly well. Every one of your characters was nuanced. I'm still kind of amazed at how you could have that cast of characters. Like you had a lot of people. You had a lot of, like, it wasn't, I've never been able to do that. Like, I could get, okay, can I maybe one more character in, but you created, you know, Citadel High for me. And that's, I think, for me, like as a Nova Scotian, to know all those places, to recognize them in the book, to see them there. You know, I remember, Chad, I don't know, but writing a book that was based in Nova Scotia, and my publisher wanted to get it in the States, and they said, well, yeah, we'll do that if she'll change the location to Maine. Well, it was a historic event that had happened in Nova Scotia. So you can't imagine. I'm like, yes. And it was published by a New York publisher, and they didn't tell, and it's Citadel High, and it's our landscape. So tell me about what it's like to have this book out into the world in a big way, because you have a New York publisher, and this has made the New York Library City one of the best book of the year awards. So tell me what that feeling is like, to take your regional landscape and put it out there. And also, I want to go back to the nuances in your characters. How do you perceive Brian and Ezra, especially?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've heard those stories too of, you know, Canadian writers having publishers ask, well, can we set this in like Maine or some Vermont or somewhere like that? And, you know, I mean, I read a ton as a kid. I grew up on Gordon Corman, like a lot of Canadians, loved Gordon Corman. He was kind of the guy who inspired me to write. But then, you know, his books were set in Ontario, and even that was kind of a rarity in those days. You know, most of the kids I read about were in like New York or the States or somewhere. So it really meant a lot to me to be able to set this book in Halifax and have the kids go to like the Central Library or near Citadel Hill, and I've had so many like local people say how much that meant to them too, right? And especially kids, you know, pick up a book and say, oh, I know that place. That wasn't something I got a lot as a kid, you know, reading in the late 80s, early 90s. So yeah, that meant a lot to me, and it's been really amazing to see the reception of this book that's set in Halifax. I had I got an email from a kid in Chicago just like 2 days ago telling me how much they love this book and they recommend it to all their friends. And that's just, those kind of things just make my day for sure. As a writer, to hear a kid tell you how much they actually love your book really, really means a lot. But yeah, with the characters, I really did want to make nobody sort of the good guy or the bad guy or the perfect character. I mean, that's even, the characters like Brian's parents, obviously cause him some difficulty in this book, but they're not bad people and he loves them very much. So, that was really important to me too, just to show that the different sides, that we all have bad days, we all have bad moments, we all have things that we struggle with, and that nobody is sort of good or bad in that sort of black or white kind of sense, just with no nuance. So yeah, that was important to me to work into the story and the characters for sure, not just for Brian and Ezra, but even some of the other characters who cause them grief along the way, to show that they're not just sort of one-dimensional villain characters as well.
One of the things that and again, I thank you for making our Nova Scotia go to a kid in Chicago. That is really important. Those readers you reach. But I want to go back. I found the way Brian reacted to what happened to his mother, and I don't want to do spoilers in the book for you, but his mother, let's say she has, well, what should we say? We should say that Brian's mom did not handle a certain situation in a very healthy way. And Brian actually had to come to her rescue. The relationship between Brian and his brother in a time of great transition in their family is absolutely beautifully done as well, that bond. So the way you portrayed somebody who had a mental illness, a suicide attempt, really, I think it was, right? I don't think that spoils anything, but the way that you handled that, and you did it with no judgment, you did it successfully, so that we went, oh wow, look at this situation, now what's going to happen, and we very quickly got invested in what was happening. The same thing happened, Jodie, when she asked that question and he began to tell her. It was like, whoa, what's going to happen here? Even though picture book, novel, it's still that interaction between characters. So I guess my question to both of you about this is, it's tough topics. You have handled really tough topics, and yet you've done it in a way that's actually quite gentle, that does begin those conversations. So when I think of yours, Chad, I think of a coming of age story, but you have all those other, it really is a coming of age story at the end of the day, but you have all those other issues. You have diversity, you have them all, but you handled them in a way that wasn't didactic. So how important was it to you to create this world and have those issues there, but not have it be like hammer hitting you over the head with a teacherly, preacherly message? Because you both succeeded doing that perfectly, I think.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely important to me. I mean, kids can smell from a mile away if you're trying to like hit them over the head with a lesson, and that will turn them off very quickly. If your characters are just meant to be object lessons, kids can suss that out. And I mean, that's one of the things I've really enjoyed hearing from kids, is like, these feel like real people, like they act like real people, they're not just object lessons. So that was definitely important to me. The other side of that too is, I think it was Madeline L'Engle who said, if a story is too difficult for adults, try writing it for children. Okay. Kids, I think we can as adults sometimes, well, often underestimate, I think, what kids can actually process and handle. And so we think, oh, well, this can't be, we can't say it like that. But kids, they're curious, they're less kind of stuck in their ways than adults. They can face things. And I mean, let's face it, especially these days, like kids right now, we're growing up in the middle of climate disasters and pandemics and mental health crises. I mean, they're dealing with a lot, and they deserve to be treated with enough respect that you give them tough topics in their books as well, because that's their life now.
Absolutely. And what I was thinking while I was going through the Ezra kind of arc and watching him and thinking how even today, compared to like when my sister was younger and those conversations couldn't be had, but how even today and as contemporary as it is, we could see how hard it was to come out, because all these books are about differences and belonging and identity and what means home and how it's about all otherness, all and what is otherness, all of that stuff. So I guess what I'm asking you here with Ezra's, were you very conscious that even today, for a young 13-year-old to say I'm gay, that it's still hard, that it's still scary? You certainly took it very gently until he tells, and I the whole time, like, was scared for him.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, I mean, it depends on where you are. I mean, there are places in North America where it's still very difficult. I mean, we're seeing that now in the media and in states where people are just, there's a huge backlash against LGBTQ plus people, you know, gay and trans right now in parts of the States. I mean, we're a little more fortunate here in Nova Scotia for sure. And, you know, I mean, when I look at my kids and their friends, I mean, it's being queer is certainly not the stigma that it was when I was a kid, but, you know, which is wonderful that they're so much more open and accepting. But I think it's still, you know, depending on your social circle, and, you know, Ezra's not so much worried about outright homophobia, but it's more just, will my friends look at me differently? You know, will my friend Ty, who's, you know, hardcore basketball player, look at me differently? You know, and again, I tried not to, I really don't like jock stereotypes in books where the jocks are always like the super macho, you know. I really tried to kind of subvert that too. But, you know, I grew up playing basketball. I still coach basketball. I know what that atmosphere can be like sometimes. So, you know, Ezra's a kid who plays basketball, hangs out with a whole bunch of people. He's not worried necessarily about being bullied, but he knows it could change the dynamics of his friendship. So I wanted to show that kind of story, that, you know, even if we're not sort of living in peak 80s homophobia, it still changes your relationships for sure.
Well, with Colby especially, right?
Yeah.
It was that, and it was very subtle, but it was so real, and we saw that. We knew there would be a shift forever probably there. And Jodie, Chad just said something, and I think is really interesting. The stronger are the voices that are coming forth that can say, okay, dominant culture, you've been there enough, you know, our white patriarchal hierarchy that's been going on forever. Voices are coming forward, stories are being told, truths are finally getting out. Do you think that there is a backlash to that? And this is a tough question, but this is a topic that I've been talking to about some of my friends. So have you seen a resistance among mainstream culture to the voices being put out there, to these stories being put out there? Do you feel that personally, or do you feel like this is just how you just keep telling? It's like we save the world one children's book at a time, you know, one teacher at a time.
I definitely think there is a bit of a backlash, and I'll share an experience I had in one of my master's courses. I took children's literacy and literary theory course, and we read Fatty Legs, and that's another residential school story. And the name of the author is slipping me right now. I believe it was co-authored, but the primary author was a survivor, and she was up in a northern community, and there was a bit of hard feelings from some of the non-Indigenous students in the class when they read that story. And just I found their reaction really, really interesting, in a sense that they actually felt like the author should have shared more of her trauma, and that there wasn't enough trauma in the book which I found really, really interesting. And we actually had a really excellent discussion about what marginalized people and people who've experienced trauma actually owe you. They don't owe you anything. Like you're getting what you're getting from them. If you can share as much or as little as you like. And there seemed to be a little bit of attitude around some of the Indigenous stories, and I just found that really interesting. I haven't experienced anything personally, but I definitely think there are some hard feelings there because these stories are hard to read for a lot of people, and I think there's a lot of people that it perhaps creates a good amount of guilt, and they don't really know what to do with that guilt, and as a result I think it comes with hard feelings, and and it's just something that we're dealing with and we're having to work through, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's something that people just need to work on, but yeah.
Jodie, I wanted you to bring that up. Chad, you were going to say something about
that. I mean, just to follow up on that, I mean, I think there's definitely a backlash. I mean, we've seen it's more pronounced again in the US where, people are trying to literally ban books from libraries and even bookstores right now. But, I think even in Canada, David A. Robertson had his books briefly pulled from a library in Ontario, so I think there tends to be, we go in waves, right? We sort of had post George Floyd, post, the residential schools discovery, people sort of become more aware and more sensitive. And then there's the backlash, which was really very predictable. Like, I don't think any Black or Indigenous person is surprised that we're in kind of the other side of that wave right now. But, we'll hear things too, like, oh, well, people only want diversity now and only Black or Indigenous authors get published. Well, like the recent studies have shown, publishing is still something like 95% white authors. I mean, there's a regular study of books published particularly in children's publishing, and Indigenous was like 1%. Like there are more stories published about like robots and talking animals than there are about Indigenous kids still. So there's still a lot more room for us to improve, for sure.
Two things on this. When I had my bookshop from the beginning, I had a lot of diversity, I mean, Isabel Knockwood's book was there, whatever. This is pre-Shubenacadie and LPC, and so what I witnessed after George Floyd and after the residential school discoveries, the books that had always been in my shop, and I would see people stop and kind of go, oh, and put it down. And interesting, maybe teachers always like, oh, I can use that in my classroom because teachers know about educating. But after last summer, those same books that I had there in 2017, they were picking them up and they were buying them too. So I had hope from that. I'm like, oh, there goes Thomas King's books. There goes that, it was like they'd always been there, but all of a sudden, it seemed like people really that were coming to the bookshop wanted to buy them and to know. I just wanted to say that I actually had hope I don't have a bookshop anymore, but I had hope that I saw the difference from 2017 to last year. So that's but I just on this question of hope. William Steig, who was an author that I loved, he said that children's literature is largely a literature of optimism. And in other words, it's not necessarily happy ever after, but it's hopeful ever after. Or the dragons might be there, but the dragons might end up being something that you invite in and you dance with, but you don't necessarily have to slay them, right? So my question to you is, in doing the books that you both have done, knowing why you wanted to do them, but do you think that overall that there's hope in your books that you offer as points of departure for conversations, but also in what you see ahead? Because right now the world is really, I mean, I'm a woman who in the 60s didn't burn my bra. I was a little bit too young for that, but I certainly marched and take back the night marches. And, transition houses didn't exist when I needed them, right? So I'm watching what's happening in the States, and it's almost like backlash, how long does it last, you know, and what is happening. So the world is in, so give me hope, because when I read your books, so tell me how you feel, both of you, as children's writers, as children's authors, as writers, writing children's literature, if you think that's true about it being a literature of optimism, and if we do have a way forward at this point. Either one of you.
Sure, I can jump in there. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I certainly, the fact that people are working so hard to keep books out of the hands of kids is a sign that they know what a difference books can make. So that gives me hope that, you know, when a kid does pick up a book, it can make a difference in their life. So, I mean, as a writer, that inspires me to keep writing those stories, you know, to have kids write to me and say how much, you know, I had another kid who's 14 and he's gay. He was in foster care, and he wrote to me and he said, when I read your book, I forget the exact way he worded it, but basically it helped him process things he hadn't even realized that he needed to process yet. Like, it opened up something for him, which, again, as a writer, I mean, that's about as much as you can hope for. So books do have power to make a difference in a kid's life, you know, to feel seen or to feel that things can be different. And I do think it's important. I mean, there's some hard topics in my book, but I did want to end on that. Not everything is happily ever after, but, you know, that it does end on kind of a note of hope for the future. So I do think that's important to build into kids' literature for sure. But yeah, I mean, I'm still hopeful that books can make a difference. And I think the backlash against books is evidence that they do make a difference for sure.
Very true. What about you, Jodie?
Yeah, optimism and truth, right? There's so
Yeah.
much truth we're seeing, and especially with, you know, books tackling tough topics, right? I feel super hopeful, especially when it comes to like the Indigenous writer world. Um, I had the opportunity to sit on a panel to I'm published through Second Story Press, and I took part in their Indigenous writing contest as a judge. So I got to read all these amazing submissions, and the books that won are just they're so beautiful, and they're just so authentically Indigenous too. Like, I'm so excited for them to come out, and they're so different from what we've seen, like what's out there right now. And I think it just makes me so excited. It makes my heart sing, you know, to see that and to read those stories, and just to have that like celebration of Indigenous people and joy and family and language and all these beautiful things. Like my story, The Train, is a really sad story. It's a residential school story, and I know that it is a very sad story, and I think that we need those stories too. We need those truth stories. And on the other end, we need all that joy, and we need those joyful stories. And I see so many of those coming out right now, and it just, it's amazing. It's so hopeful. Yeah.
But Jodie, something else you did though with this, which I think is just stunning, is the notion of waiting. It's the notion of waiting, that there, years and years ago, a long time ago, when I went up north, and my friends are still there. And I remember and my friend, Bernadette, she said to me, "It's okay, Sheree, because we're patient. And we know that this will turn." Like, she has always had this vision that someday we will be leading again. Like, I have never, she said, we are so patient.
Yeah.
And, you know, we wait for a long time for that seal to poke its head up so that we can eat, you know. And because I'd had that conversation, it struck me so much that in your book, there's that sorrow, but there's also this resilience and the idea of waiting. And he said, "If I don't, who will?" Like for people who haven't read the book. So and Ashley says, "I will wait with you." Mm-hmm. So it's not resolved, but it's there. It's like the hope is there, and the hope for the joy is there. And yes, when you start to see joyful stories coming, then you know, like all, because that's such a part of the culture too. It's such a big part. And yeah, now I'm going to just switch a little bit. I want to ask you both as writers about your editorial process, because I always think that it's interesting of where you start and what your relationship was like with the editor and how that was for you. Because so just a little bit on editorial process.
Mine was, I only have one book and it's a children's book. So mine was really, I don't want to say it was easy, but it kind of was. Like I didn't have a novel or anything. And I had a really pretty quick and smooth editorial process with my editor. The only thing that we had some discussions on were the use of language, the use of Mi'kmaq words in my book, just because there's quite a bit of nuance in the language in certain words. Like, for example, Uncle calls Ashley Dus, which is it's like a nickname that older people will give to young girls. And it's short for Entus, which means my daughter. And so there was that confusion, like, well, why does he call her my daughter when that's not his daughter, that's his niece, his great niece at that. And so we had some really good conversations back and forth, and like very respectful conversations. There was no, oh, you need to take that out. It was just explain to me, like teach me. And so that was kind of the only like real back and forth that I had with my editor. I think I just really got lucky. First book, lucky. So yeah.
Because simple does not equal easy. Picture books are very hard, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
To say so much with so little. I always say, people used to come to workshops and they go, well, I want to be a writer, so I thought I'd start with something easy. I thought I'd start with children's books. And I would, I smile because I went 7 years to university to learn how to, and I would go, well, you might be in the wrong class, but it is an art form. And what about you, Chad, the editorial part?
Sure. So, I mean, when I'm writing a first draft, I kind of describe my drafting process as just throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. It usually takes me, like, my first drafts are like long and messy, and then I gradually figure out the story I'm actually trying to tell, kind of peel away at it. And I've been really lucky. So my books are with a company called Abrams Kids. Amulet Books is the imprint. And I've been lucky to work with a really great editor. Her name's Emily DeLuga, and like she gets my characters. Like I'm working on, actually the book I'm working on right now is a sequel to Thanks a Lot Universe. My third book is going to be a sequel to this one.
Hey.
And so like, I'm in the revision process on that now, and I got my editorial letter from her, and I was like, man, she knows these characters like better than I do. Like she gets their motivations, she like understands how they would act in certain situations. So like it's a really great collaborative process to work with somebody who really understands the story you're trying to tell and really helps draw the best out of your writing. So I've been really fortunate that way to work with someone who's a great collaborator. And I have an agent too. I mean, some people kind of work directly with publishers. I went the literary agent route, and my agent's the same way. Like they're really great at giving me feedback on just helping me to bring the best out of the story. So, I mean, for me, that's been one of the, I guess, biggest, but also best learning curves as a writer is just, we tend to think of writing as a very solitary process. And my early drafts usually are, but then once you open up and start collaborating with people, it really, it's really a wonderful process.
And Chad, that's exactly why I asked, because sometimes I think the invisible people in the whole children's, any book, it's a book chain of being, but I've often thought, I've always had such great experiences with my editors, because it seems like you're so alone on the voyage.
Yeah.
And then once you offer it to someone and they start to get it, and like you said, they start to know even more than you, it's like, and it is a collaboration, and those editors are artists too, and I don't know how they do it. And so I just wanted to give a nod tonight to the invisible ability of our editors, who also do ask those questions and bring out the best in us. Get a little lazy there, Sheree. You didn't get a better verb there. Like people don't realize that, you do get that kind of help, right? That they're part of that collaborative process. Now, I don't have a time. How are we doing for time? I'm going to grab my watch. Just hang on 1 minute.
Sure.
And I have another question. Just hang on. Yes, we're probably at that point. So yes, I kind of have a good sense of time. So we're getting close to the question and answer. I did want to ask you each one other question, which is, what are you working on now? And what about your latest book, Chad? So I know that you're doing your master's in education, Jodie, so probably not a lot, but you have a seed
I
back there.
Graduated. I
Oh,
need to
you
update my
did?
bio.
Congratulations.
Yeah. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I just graduated, so yeah.
Busy month.
Yeah, yeah. And Chad, you have one coming. Is it out now? May 2022, I think it was supposed to be
Yeah,
out.
so my second book is out now. I've got a copy here. It's called Let the Monster Out. So it's another middle grade story. It's really different. I mean, Thanks a Lot Universe is very, contemporary, real world. This one's a lot. It's got some more kind of sci-fi mystery kind of elements. It's about a boy who moves to a small town and very strange things start happening and kids start experiencing each other's nightmares. So it's got some kind of Stranger Things vibes. A lot of people have sort of compared it to like a middle grade Stranger Things. So yeah, that one was really fun to get to work on. And then the one I'm sort of working on next is, like I said, the sequel to Thanks a Lot Universe, which is going to be out sometime next year, like late fall 2023.
That's fantastic. Now I'm trying to look and see. I don't see any questions in the question and answer part. I'm just going to look here where it says chat. I don't see anybody asking a question. Is there anyone? So I don't think so. I'm sorry, I'm not so great with this technology here. But if I said to you both, I'm just probably wrapping up because there's no questions here. If I said to you both, the difference between telling our stories orally, like the oral tradition of storytelling, and then having the stories in a book, and the power of the voice. And I think of this with you, Jodie, because it's an oral tradition in your culture. But also I came from a dad who we'd say, Dad, tell us stories with your mouth talking. So do you as authors also like the idea of your books being recorded, audio or whatever, so that the human voice can be heard as well?
Yeah, I certainly do. I'm actually listening to, they gave me a free copy of the audiobook for Let the Monster Out. So I'm listening to it now. And I did the same with Thanks a Lot Universe. I've been lucky enough to have them both turned into audiobooks. And it's really fun to hear someone else bring your stories to life, and just to hear the way they kind of intonation, how they bring the characters to life. So that's been a really fun experience for me. Like it's funny, like I've read this book so many times, like that to just sit down with the hardcover and read through it again, I'm like, I've done that a million times already. But to hear the audiobook, it's like it's fresh to me in a new way as an author, even to hear someone else bring the story to life. So yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of audiobooks, period. I listen to them a lot when I'm like running or mowing the lawn or things like that. So it's really great for me to be able to hear my stories in audio format, for sure.
And Jodie, do you have any plans, do you think, of being able to do that? Bringing it?
Yeah, I don't know, like if that's really done with children's books. I know there's been a few people on YouTube who have done read alouds of my book. Oh, cool. And I've checked a couple of them out, and I really love hearing my book read by somebody else as well, because there's a lot of emotion in it. And it's really nice to hear other people capture that emotion. And I mean, even when I read it, I like, when I get towards the end, my voice starts to crack and break, and I'm like, I wrote a really sad story. So.
Both made me cry. So like I said, no tears in the writer, no tears in the reader, and you made me laugh. Also to Chad with your wordplay and the tenderness of that relationship. I just feel it's exactly what I needed this spring. I, like most writers, as an anxious person, can relate to a lot of in all those characters, the sense of family, the sense of belonging, the sense of being who we are. of not knowing who we are. It's so rich, and it was a gift to me that the Atlantic Book Awards asked me to do this. I've been saying no to a lot of things. I am so glad I said yes to this, and I am. Ann Connor Brimer would be so proud, and she would. Nova Scotia is going to Chicago, and that those voices that haven't been heard and those stories that haven't been told are being told. Anne would be, she's up there and she's smiling and she's going, yes, let's change the world, one children's book at a time. So I certainly thank you, and good luck. I mean, you're already winners to me, and I wish I could have the bookshop open just to sell your books this summer, but maybe another year. But I certainly will be telling people about these books, and congratulations, both of you, and continued good stories coming from the heart and the soul and the mind and the spirit.
Thank you.
Well, I'm so grateful.
Thanks. This is a lot of fun.
Yeah. Thank you.
Whimsy's done too.
Yeah, had to make the appearance at the end.
Mom, I'm done.
There's the sign.